Hello everyone, this is Noah Villaverde, host of Blank Green Canvas, back with another video. From 1979 to 1986, Pixar was under Lucasfilm as part of the computer division known as the Graphics Group. In 1986, Pixar was spun off into its own independent company after Steve Jobs paid George Lucas $5 million for the technology rights and invested $5 million of his own money as capital. Fast forward 9 years to 1995, Pixar and Disney would begin their collaboration with the original Toy Story, which achieved both critical and commercial success. Pixar would be bought by Disney 11 years later for a whopping $7.4 billion. Interestingly enough, Lucasfilm would eventually join the Disney family, bringing the two studios together under the same roof. For its first 15 years, Pixar released 11 feature-length films and all received positive reception from critics and audiences alike, winning 6 Academy Awards for Best Animated Feature. With their latest 2 films, Up and Toy Story 3, both received nominations for Best Picture, becoming the only 2 animated films to be nominated in that category since Disney's Beauty and the Beast in 1992. From 1995 to 2010, Pixar was on top of the world, and as the 2010s continued, the studio would venture into a new era which included several new original films and a few more sequels to some of their most beloved classics. Following an unprecedented 15 years of success, culminating with Toy Story 3, becoming the highest grossing animated film of all time, what does Pixar follow that up with?
Someone give me water! Quick,
Cars 2 is a bad movie, and in a lot of ways, it's the black sheep in Pixar's filmography. On its own, it's a pretty irritating children's film, but when you take into account that this is following the Apex Mountain era of Pixar with Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, and Toy Story 3, one can't help but feel somewhat betrayed by this movie. If it were from any other studio, this would probably be like a C-, but as part of Pixar's catalog, it's reached the D range. Again, I like the first Cars movie fine, but never thought that it needed a sequel. But given that the merchandise sales within the franchise's first 5 years brought in $10 billion, it's not a surprise why Disney wanted to continue the series. Unfortunately, Cars 2 is without a doubt Pixar's most soulless film to date, and a blatant cash grab. It tries to expand the world of Cars by bringing Lightning McQueen and the gang on a global tour with the World Grand Prix. Now, this on its own would be a viable way to expand the world, but the difference here is that the story switches gears from Lightning McQueen to Mater, who somehow is brought into this ridiculous spy plot. Mater is once again voiced by Larry the Cable Guy, and as someone who tolerated the character in the first film, I grew to detest this character here because he proves to be Pixar's most annoying main character to date. Mater has the same problem as the minions from Despicable Me, side characters that were fine for what they were but become intolerable in future installments that put them at the center. But beyond Mater and his spy adventure, the film is tonally all over the place. In one scene, you have literal toilet gags, and in another, a car literally gets executed. How is this rated G? I hadn't seen this film since theaters nearly 10 years ago, and at the time, I was lenient on the film, acknowledging that it's certainly the least of Pixar's filmography, but made excuses for it because I love the studio so much. However, when it comes to things you love, when something is straight up bad, you have to call it out. I hate to say it, but Cars 2 proved that even the greats like Pixar aren't infallible. It is what it is. 3 out of 10.
I am Merida, firstborn descendant of Clan Dunbrog, and I'll be shooting for my own hand.
A year after Cars 2 tainted Pixar's reputation, Brave was released. Going in, I had high hopes for the film because this was Pixar's first fairy tale, and the trailers made it look like it would become this whimsical fantasy epic with a long overdue strong female protagonist for the studio. Unfortunately, unlike Merida's archery skills, Brave misses the target. It's definitely a better film than Cars 2, but when you consider the potential that this film had, it's still underwhelming. Before I get into my main problems with the film, I wanted to shed light on some of its merits. The animation is still pretty great, nearly 9 years later, and the way medieval Scotland is brought to life is stunning, and I remain impressed at how detailed Merida's fiery red hair looks. I also enjoy the film's first act, and believe that it sets up a compelling story about a mother and daughter's conflicts. Unfortunately, once Merida's mother Eleanor turns into a bear, the film just goes off the rails and turns into a generic children's fantasy adventure. I understand that ultimately Pixar is making films marketed for children, but what they have done so well in the past is entertaining both children and adults. Admittedly, the first act does have some entertainment for the adults, and as the film goes on, the stakes become pretty serious for the characters, but it's undercut by some childish gags and hijinks. It doesn't help that Merida as a character is not as compelling as she should be. Kelly MacDonald does a good job, but Merida herself is still underwritten as a protagonist. She does some cool things as an archer, and the film sets up a potentially engrossing dynamic between her and her mother Eleanor, voiced by Emma Thompson, but that's all but thrown away once it turns into Scottish Brother Bear. I will say, without Brave, we wouldn't have one of the funniest scenes in Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Ach, lang me your lumrick give me a moose nail, lee your gun away a teardrop in his eye. Hey, she back, wee lassie?
What did she just say?
We don't know.
We can't understand her. She's from the other studio.
I hadn't seen Brave since theaters and was hoping I'd enjoy it more this time around. Unfortunately, it remains a big missed opportunity. 5.5 out of 10.
Have fun, kids! I'll just be here listening to my tunes.
After 2 letdowns from Pixar, the studio starts making a comeback in quality with Monsters University, a prequel to Monsters, Inc. When the first trailers dropped for this film, I was both excited at the prospect of reuniting with Mike and Sully, but also nervous about how the film would turn out after Cars 2 and Brave. I remember loving Monsters University after seeing it in theaters, and I even reviewed the film on this channel. Seeing it again 7 years later, I can safely say that while I don't love it as much as I did when it first came out, Monsters University still holds up as an entertaining coming-of-age comedy that really adds depth to Mike and Sully's characters, especially Mike. I really love Mike's arc here, showcasing that ever since he was a child, he always wanted to be a scarer. Once he enrolls into Monsters University, he studies tirelessly as part of the scare program, only to have reality hit him in the face. Or eye. The film is really compelling because it teaches a mostly unseen message from animated movies to children about accepting their limitations, and how working with different people from different backgrounds and skill sets can lead to something someone can't achieve solely on their own. Monsters University is also just really funny. Of course, Billy Crystal and John Goodman slide back into their roles with ease, but the additions of new characters around the university campus, particularly the misfit members of the Uzma Kappa fraternity, are wonderful. As a big fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I still get a kick out of hearing Charlie Day's voice come out of his character Art.
I can't go back to jail!
When I saw this back in June 2013, I just finished my junior year of high school. I graduated from Fresno State with a bachelor's degree in multimedia on December 2019, and upon rewatching this film, I enjoy some of the college gags even more this time around. Also, having finished my undergraduate education, I still find the film's conclusion to be unconventional yet refreshing. Monsters University may not reach the heights of Monsters, Inc., but it's still a solid companion piece. I feel that some people are harsh with this film, and a lot of Pixar's upcoming sequels for that matter, because of how iconic those first films are to us, but I still contend that there's quality to be found here. I'm eager to see more from the monster world when the upcoming Monsters at Work series hits Disney Plus in the near future. Overall, I like Monsters University a lot. 7.5 out of 10.
Need I remind you of how great things were there? Our room, our backyard, our friends.
Triple and
We'll make you smile.
Can I ask?
If Monsters University was a step in the right direction for Pixar to make a comeback in quality, Inside Out is a return to form. Pete Docter's wonderful adventure personifying the emotions in our head is one of the most imaginative, colorful, and emotionally resonant films from the studio. The concept of personified emotions within someone's head has been popularized in the past, including the 1990s sitcom Herman's Head and in cartoons such as SpongeBob.
You don't pay me. We don't even exist. were just a clever visual metaphor used to personify the abstract concept of thought.
But the way in which Pixar explores the mind of 11-year-old Riley is so entertaining and clever the entire time. Much of that is thanks to the 5 emotions themselves being so well written and cast. Amy Poehler as joy, Phyllis Smith as sadness, Lewis Black as anger, Bill Hader as fear, and Mindy Kaling as disgust are some of the most perfect casting Pixar has ever done for their characters. The film primarily focuses on yet another dynamic duo with joy and sadness, as the two venture off through the chaos of Riley's mind as she deals with new hardships having moved from Minnesota to San Francisco. Joy and sadness are wonderful characters that quite literally complement one another well. Similar to how Woody and Buzz learn to respect one another in the first Toy Story, Joy, who's mostly dismissive of Sadness's merits throughout the film, realizes her value, and as the film concludes, she learns to accept her as a necessary part of Riley's life. And how can we forget one of Pixar's most memorable characters? Richard Kind, who has had minor roles in previous Pixar films, voices Bing Bong, perhaps the most tragic character Pixar has had up to that point. The trailers for Inside Out kept the character's role in the story under wraps, so when we're introduced to the character, it's a pleasant surprise at first that eventually hits you in the gut when his arc completes. Overall, Inside Out was a much needed return to form for Pixar. It fits in quite well with some of the studio's best work from its first 15 years and is yet another example as to why Pete Docter is a master storyteller and the right person to serve as Pixar's chief creative officer. 9 out of 10.
I drowned that croc in my own blood.
Whoa. Dang! Oh, look. Gives me little goosies every time.
I have to come clean. Ever since Finding Nemo, I saw every single Pixar movie in theaters and remained a devoted fan of the studio, even with disappointments like Cars 2 and Brave. And yet, I never got around to seeing The Good Dinosaur in theaters, which is saying a lot not just because of how much I revered Pixar, but also due to the fact that I was a MoviePass subscriber at the time, meaning I could have easily seen it. The trailers for the film were just so uninteresting to me that when the opportunity came for some friends wanting to go see the film, I recommended we would all go see Creed instead, which would be my second time watching that great film in theaters. 5 years have passed, and in planning this 2-part video series, I had to finally watch it, and I gotta say, it's okay. I guess it's fine. The Good Dinosaur was a film that was plagued with a lot of issues during the production. When it was first announced, the film had a different story and even a different voice cast that included Lucas Neff, John Lithgow, Frances McDormand, Neil Patrick Harris, Judy Greer, and Bill Hader. In the final version of the film, only Frances McDormand would remain, and the film itself was as described by John Lithgow, who would eventually be replaced by Jeffrey Wright, as completely reimagined. On a technical scale, The Good Dinosaur boasts some of Pixar's most stunning animation to date. The film is set in an alternate history where dinosaurs never became extinct, and the way in which the scenery in particular is brought to life is mesmerizing. I'm particularly awestruck at the scenes involving fireflies and flash floods, both serving as brilliant showcases for Pixar's progression in animation quality. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about the story and characters. We have yet another Pixar duo in Arlo the Apatosaurus and Spot the Little Cave Boy. What occurs is a boy and his dog type of story that has some amusing bits here and there, but nothing to write home about. Also, for as stunning as the animation for the environments and landscape look on screen, the character designs for the dinosaurs themselves, especially Arlo, were a bit too cartoony for a film that, like Brave, before it has tonal issues. For one, there are some genuinely touching moments involving Arlo's father in the first act, but the journey in which Arlo and Spot go on just isn't as dynamic as it should be. While watching the film, part of me wished that this would have been done with minimal dialogue, because Arlo's voice was just a little too cute for my tastes. Again, Pixar is making films for children, so I get that, but the first 30 minutes of WALL-E showcased Pixar's knack for visual storytelling that I think The Good Dinosaur could have done more with that in mind. Overall, The Good Dinosaur is a below-average outing from Pixar. Given that it's available on Disney+, at least give it a shot to enjoy some of the stunning imagery, but unfortunately that is all it brings to the table. 5 out of 10.
Oh, thank goodness.
Sure, that's all right. Don't you worry.
Oh, Gerald! Get off the rock! Gerald!
After winning his second Academy Award with WALL-E, Andrew Stanton would make his live-action directorial debut with Disney's John Carter, which hit theaters in March 2012 and became one of the biggest box office bombs in film history, leading to a $200 million write-down from Disney. Roughly 4 months after, it was reported that Stanton would be directing a sequel to Finding Nemo. With that in mind, it's hard not to speculate that Stanton was obligated to helm a sequel to one of Pixar's most successful films to make up for the massive financial loss from John Carter, so going into Finding Dory, it's easy to have mixed feelings and expectations. Thankfully, Finding Dory is a very good movie. Again, like Monsters University, it's not as good as the original film, but I still find it to be a solid movie in its own right. The film is set 1 year after the events of Finding Nemo, and here Dory has a flashback of her parents. She remembers something about the Jewel of Morro Bay, California, and along with Marlin and Nemo, they go off on an adventure to find her parents. This brings them to the Marine Life Institute, where hilarity ensues. Finding Nemo was a more emotional journey centered on a father searching for his son, whereas Finding Dory ups the comedy significantly. It still has its share of touching moments, particularly in regards to Dory's backstory with her parents, but what stands out to me the most in this film is just how funny it is. This is one of Pixar's funniest films, and much of that is due to the colorful characters both old and new, as well as some really entertaining set pieces. Dory is at the center of this story, and unlike Mater in Cars 2, she's a solid main character here. Going in, it's easy to be nervous about how Dory's short-term memory loss can turn into an annoying gag for an entire film, but the script by Stanton and Victoria Strauss treats her disability with care. I also love some of the new characters brought in, including Hank the Septipus, played by Ed O'Neill, Destiny the Whale Shark, played by Caitlin Olsen, and Bailey the Beluga Whale, played by Ty Burrell. Also, I'd be remiss not to mention Dory's parents, whom are both perfectly cast in Diane Keaton and Eugene Levy, as well as Sigourney Weaver playing herself. My favorite scene is definitely the climax, which is a great tonal contrast from the original film. Whereas Finding Nemo's was more emotionally cathartic, Finding Dory's catharsis is viscerally hilarious and is certainly one of Pixar's funniest sequences. Overall, I dig Finding Dory on rewatch. I appreciate the representation it brings for people with disabilities, and I just find it really funny throughout. 8 out of 10. I'm not gonna lie, when the first teaser trailer for Cars 3 dropped, I was blown away. Honestly, to this day, I think about that oddly dark and gritty teaser trailer a lot. But in all seriousness, Cars 3 is fine. For one, it's a proper sequel to the original film. Not only does it feel like the natural progression for Lightning McQueen's story, it also completely ignores the events in Cars 2, right down to Mater's role being demoted significantly. Honestly, we can disavow Cars 2 as some sort of weird dream Mater had. Cars 3 finds Lightning McQueen as a veteran racer, having won 7 Piston Cups.
He did what in his cup?
As seen in the dark and gritty teaser, he suffers a disastrous crash while trying to catch up with his new rival, Jackson Storm. After his crash, Lightning attempts to revitalize his career and prove that he's still the best in the world. Cars 3 follows the original film in the sense that it satirizes sports culture, but while the first film explores that from the perspective of a hotshot rookie, we see it from the perspective of an athlete nearing the end of his career as he knows it. Some of those gags are amusing, and there's still a bit of charm to this world that we've seen from the first film, but it doesn't really add much new to the table. Lightning gets a new trainer named Cruz Ramirez, played by Cristela Alonso. Cruz dreams of becoming a racer like Lightning, and through that, he ends up mentoring her to pursue her dreams, culminating in a finale in which she takes over for him to finish the final race of the film. Honestly, there's not much else to say about Cars 3. It's as generic as a film as you can get, but there is one thing that's been bugging me since rewatching it. During the demolition derby sequence, it features a monster truck style school bus. For one, what purpose does a school bus serve in the world of Cars? School buses are designed to transport children to school. Given that this is a world exclusively populated by vehicles, what's the point? What's her purpose? 5 out of 10.
Miguel!
Abuelita!
What are you doing here? You leave my grandson alone.
Post Toy Story 3, Pixar has had an interesting run. Up to this point, we had the massive misfire with Cars 2, mediocrity in Brave, The Good Dinosaur, and Cars 3, solid sequels in Monsters University and Finding Dory, and one truly great film in Inside Out. In November 2017, Coco hit theaters. I remember seeing it with my family on Thanksgiving after I finished a shift at the movie theater I worked at the time. I was thoroughly exhausted but was intrigued at what Pixar had in store. To be honest, my mood going into the film itself was a bit sour, partially because of that over-long Frozen special preceding it, and by the time the actual film started, I was ready to fall asleep. Well, Coco woke me up, and by the end of the film, I was a complete mess. I rarely cry during any film, and I can safely say that Coco had me sob not once, but twice. This is a beautifully crafted film in every way, from the animation, the lovable characters, and the incredible music. If Inside Out was a return to form for Pixar, Coco takes one step beyond even that film. Coco isn't a full musical, but it's as close as it can get from Pixar. Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez, the married duo that also wrote the songs for the Frozen movies, wrote the songs for this film, all of which are wonderful, especially their Academy Award-winning song Remember Me, which is showcased throughout the film with different meanings behind it, showcasing how music means something different to anyone performing and or listening to it. And what else can be said about the animation? The film brings this small yet lively Mexican town to life accurately, but it's when we travel to the land of the dead where the imagery is some of the most stunning Pixar has ever rendered. It's vibrant and beautiful as it honors Mexican culture. But what I love most about Coco is how the story and its emotional resonance sneaks up on you. As I mentioned, the song Remember Me is used throughout the film to evoke different themes that further explain its meaning to the characters involved. And when we learn the true meaning behind the song for the first time, it plucks right at your heartstrings. But just when you thought you already cried enough, Miguel sings the song to Mama Coco, and somehow Pixar manages to get every last teardrop out of you. Rewatching the film this time around, it hit deeper for me. Last year, I spent nearly 5 months in the Philippines during the pandemic, and I was staying with my beloved grandmother, Nanay Lucy, during that time. She had a similar condition that Mama Coco had in the film, and a few days after I left, she passed away. I'll admit, it was really cathartic revisiting Coco with that perspective. I guess I can nitpick that the reveal regarding Ernesto de la Cruz is predictable, but that's about it. Otherwise, Coco is one of Pixar's best films, and is perhaps the best Pixar film of the 2010s. 9.5 out of 10.
Good evening, everyone.
Out of every film in Pixar's catalog, no film needed a sequel more than The Incredibles. 14 years later, was it worth it? I'd say yes. After winning his second Academy Award for Best Animated Feature with Ratatouille, Brad Bird went on to direct live-action films. His first film was Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was a stellar debut, and he followed that up with Tomorrowland for Disney. Unfortunately for Bird, Tomorrowland was a box office bomb, losing Disney around $120 to $150 million, and right after that film, he started work on the long-awaited Incredibles 2. I bring this up again because this scenario feels so similar to what Bird's Pixar colleague Andrew Stanton experienced with John Carter and Finding Dory. Again, it's hard not to speculate that Bird jumped on Incredibles 2 after Tomorrowland as an obligation to Disney and also to get out of director's jail, but whereas Finding Nemo wasn't a film that fans demanded a follow-up to, The Incredibles was. Honestly, Incredibles 2 is a great sequel. The action is still top-notch, the characters are as dynamic as ever, the world is even more realized, and the animation is stellar. Again, similar to Monsters University and Finding Dory, it's not as good as the original film, but out of every one of Pixar's non-Toy Story sequels thus far, it's definitely the best one. I love how this film puts Elastigirl at the center of the action, with Mr. Incredible at home taking care of the kids. The family dynamic was great in the first film, but I must say that the sequel actually explores the family's relationships even better this time around. Obviously, the family is still dealing with much uncertainty given that supers are still illegal, but seeing them deal with their dilemmas together is so entertaining to watch. Jack undoubtedly steals the movie though. At the end of the original film, the audience knew what he's capable of, but to see how much further his powers go in the film is delightful, particularly when he is spending time with Edna Mode. As for issues, I'm not the biggest fan of the film's main antagonist. It's revealed that Evelyn Dever, voiced by Catherine Keener, is the screen slaver the whole time, And beyond it being a bit too predictable for my liking, I mean, come on, her name is a pun for evil endeavor. The character herself is a tad bit underwritten. She's not a bad villain by any means, but when compared to Syndrome, she's nowhere near as compelling as she could have been. While I wish the film had a more compelling antagonist, Incredibles 2 is still supremely entertaining. I'm happy that for the foreseeable future, Pixar is focusing on more original stories, but I'm still hoping a third film will come down the line. 8.5 out of 10.
It's nice to meet you, Woody. And you are?
This is Forky.
I'm trash.
Pixar bookended the 2010s with Toy Story films. Toy Story 3 was as definitive of a finale as you can get, so the prospect of a fourth film was something I was deeply nervous about when it was first announced. I didn't want Pixar to ruin their virtually flawless trilogy with a subpar fourth film. Thankfully, Toy Story 4 doesn't ruin the trilogy at all. In fact, it's pretty great. The animation is stunning, it boasts some great laughs, and brings closure to the series in a way I never anticipated. In part 1 of this Pixar retrospective, I emphasized the Toy Story films as a proper trilogy. I still maintain that it is in fact a trilogy, but also contend that Toy Story 4 is a great epilogue for said trilogy. The first 3 films are all about Woody, Buzz, and the rest of the gang's relationship with Andy, whereas Toy Story 4 serves as a proper coda for Woody's journey. As I mentioned in part 1, Woody is my favorite character in any animated film, and that is due to how all 4 films really dig deep into his development through the years. Through each film, Woody continues to grow into his own, and Toy Story 4 more than any film dives deep into who Woody is. The film explores some of the most mature themes in any Toy Story film, as Woody tries to find a renewed purpose in his life beyond Andy. Through his journey, Woody tries to find a new purpose in looking after Forky, played wondrously by Tony Hale, and in reuniting with his long-lost love, Bo Peep, played by Annie Potts. I will say that while I do think Toy Story 4 is a great movie, its greatest strength in centering on Woody is also where I find one flaw. Again, this is more of a personal thing for me. While Buzz is still involved as a main player, virtually everyone else in the gang has very little to do with the story. While I understand why these characters are sidelined, I still wanted to see them more actively involved in the plot because I love them so much. But in their relative absence throughout the film's second act, we meet a slew of delightful new characters including Duke Kaboom, played by Keanu Reeves, and the hilarious Ducky and Bunny, played by Key and Peele. I also really like the film's supposed antagonist, Gabby Gabby, played by Christina Hendricks. She could have easily been a retread of previous villains like the Prospector and Lotso, but what they do with her in the end was a refreshing departure from that. And in regards to the film's ending, I feel that it was the right way to go. Am I sad that Woody decides to leave the gang and start a new life with Bo Peep? Absolutely, but it was a necessary end for his arc. Seeing Woody say goodbye to the gang got me tearing up, but when he and Buzz hug one last time, I completely lost it. Woody and Buzz are one of the most iconic duos in cinema history, and in some ways, they are the first fictional characters I've ever been attached to, and seeing them part ways really got to me. Overall, the Toy Story trilogy is still a perfect trilogy, but Toy Story 4 serves as a great epilogue to it. 9 out of 10.
Retrogor Invisia!
When I was in the Philippines last year, I had the chance to see 2 films in theaters there before the entire 2020 film slate was delayed, Onward and Bloodshot. I liked Onward a lot more than Bloodshot. Onward is a personal story for director and co-writer Dan Scanlon. It's inspired by his real-life experience with his older brother and how they both lost their father at a very young age. After hearing an audio clip from his father, he was inspired to write this movie. Tom Holland and Chris Pratt play another dynamic duo in Ian and Barley Lightfoot, 2 brothers that embark on a quest to find an artifact that will bring back their deceased father for one more day. I really like Onward overall. I enjoy the characters, the animation, and was entertained by the journey Ian and Barley embark on and was invested in their mission to bring back their father. Also, the world of Onward itself is one that is interesting, but I found it a bit too similar to Disney's Zootopia, only swap out animals with fantasy creatures for their take on modern society. I will say that while I do enjoy the film's first 2 acts, it's still somewhat slight in quality for Pixar's standards, but it's nonetheless entertaining. Much of the film follows the typical road trip movie cliches, including a clash with a biker gang, among other shenanigans. While the first 2 acts are entertaining, yet standard, Onward boasts one of Pixar's best conclusions. For one, the action climax is really well done, and I dig the design of the final boss the characters have to face, but it's Ian's revelation about Barley's positive influence on his life, as well as Barley's last encounter with his father, that really bring it home. If the first 2 acts were as great as the film's ending, Onward would be one of Pixar's best films. Instead, we have a pretty entertaining yet standard road trip movie that thankfully peaks narratively and emotionally when it really needed to. Overall, Onward is pretty good, but that ending is great. 8 out of 10.
That guy was lost in the music. He was in it, and he took the rest of us with him. That's when I knew I was born to play.
Soul was one of my most anticipated movies of 2020. A new Pete Docter-directed Pixar film on an original concept exploring the meaning of life? Sign me up. Obviously, the film was originally set for a theatrical release, but the pandemic led to delays before the film was ultimately put on Disney Plus as an exclusive release on Christmas Day. It's been more than a whole month since its release, and after watching it 4 times, I think Soul is the best Pixar film since the Apex Mountain era of Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, and Toy Story 3. With stunning animation, 3-dimensional characters, exquisite music from Jon Batiste, Trent Reznor, and Atticus Ross, and themes that leave you pondering your own life long after you watch the film, what's not to love about this movie? In Soul, we meet Pixar's first black protagonist in Joe Gardner, played by Jamie Foxx. He's a middle school band teacher with dreams of becoming a professional jazz musician. He's been struggling through gigs for years until he lands a gig with acclaimed saxophonist Dorothea Williams, likely to be his big break. Unfortunately for Joe, moments after he books the gig, he dies. Right off the bat, Joe Gardner is one of Pixar's best protagonists. Jamie Foxx is so good in the role, bringing palpable passion in his voice as he expresses his love for jazz music. Joe's journey throughout the film is one of Pixar's most mature to date, and much of that is thanks to his dynamic with the reluctant 22 voiced by Tina Fey. Throughout their adventure, both in The Great Before and on Earth, we learn more about what makes both of them unique in their own way. On a technical level, Soul is stunningly animated. It's unfortunate most of us can't enjoy the film in theaters right now because the animation, especially when Joe transfers from the path to the great beyond into the great before, is breathtaking. The use of lighting and shadows throughout certain sequences in the film, particularly when Joe is playing the piano, is so on point and showcases how far Pixar has progressed technologically. Soul also boasts one of Pixar's best scores to date. Jon Batiste composed a number of original jazz songs for all the scenes in New York City, while Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross composed the score for the metaphysical sequences. Again, I've seen Soul 4 times, and on each viewing, I gain a larger appreciation for not only the film's merits, but for the themes it explores. After Joe performs his gig with Dorothea Williams, he is not as fulfilled as he had hoped. This moment left me pondering over my own dreams and ambitions in life, particularly as a creative person, and seeing the film tackle themes of uncertainty and purpose was something I really needed to see at this time. Soul is a celebration of life itself, and the mentors that help us along the way, told through stunning animation, impeccable voice acting, wonderful music, and brilliant storytelling. It's top-tier Pixar. 10 out of 10. And now, we rank all 23 films from worst to best. Number 23, Cars 2. Number 22, The Good Dinosaur. Number 21, Cars 3. Number 20, Brave. Number 19, Cars. Number 18, A Bug's Life. Number 17, Monsters University. Number 16, Finding Dory. Number 15, Onward. Number 14, Incredibles 2. Number 13, Inside Out. Number 12, Monsters Inc. Number 11, Toy Story 4. Number 10, Coco. Number 9, Finding Nemo. Number 8, Soul. Number 7, Toy Story. Number 6, The Incredibles. Number 5, WALL-E. Number 4, Toy Story 2. Number 3, Ratatouille. Number 2, Toy Story 3. And number 1, Up. So that's Pixar's first 23 films. After marathoning through all of them in release order and putting together this retrospective, I have gained an even bigger appreciation for the studio. I am eager to see what the future holds for the studio, and it looks like their upcoming projects both on Disney Plus and on the big screen are pretty exciting. Thank you for watching my 2-part retrospective on Pixar Animation Studios. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. I am Noah of Blank Green Canvas. See you in the next video.